Well, thank you for joining us. We had a great lunch program. We're going to move forward with our energy panel, and I'm going to introduce Todd Staples, who will be our moderator today. Todd, we all know, once upon a time was our state rep and state senator here for us in East Texas. Did a fantastic job in the service of the people of Texas. Most recently, he was named the president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association in November of 2014. And he's really played an instrumental role in that, in helping guide a lot of the work we've done in energy with Chair Darby when we did the Sunset Bill with the Railroad Commission and many other things. We know in Texas oil and gas, that's the straw that stirs the drink, and has since been to the top and has really driven our economy and continues to do so. Often maligned, but absolutely necessary. And so I think today's conversation will dispel some of the myths and mysteries of oil and gas, but also it comes at a very opportune time as we look what's going on around the world. We got our good friends here from Cheniere talking about LNG, one of our sponsors, and thank y'all, Matt, for that. What we see going on in the Ukraine, the strategic threat that is posed by the Russian invasion, and how that impacts Western Europe. And Texas is in a unique place to help solve those problems and move our world forward. So with that, I'm going to bring up a proud Aggie, but he's always on the Nacogdoches campus of SS Bay every chance he gets, Todd Staples.
Thank you very much, Representative Carty. Thank you for your leadership for Texas. It is good to be back on the campus of Stephen F. Austin State University, and it's great to see so many friends that I have here in Nacogdoches in East Texas today. I appreciate Representative Carty, the Chamber, Senator Nichols for your work and leadership to put this program on today. It was exciting to hear from Captain Cassidy at lunch, wasn't it? And he is an American hero, and he deserves another round of applause for sure. I just got to make sure I've got the right water bottle here. I don't want to drink after Travis Clardy. As much as I love and appreciate him, I've got my limitations on where I'll go with that. We did just talk about space travel. We just talked about aviation. All that's made possible by oil and natural gas. And we're today are going to reach new heights in our conversation. We have three great leaders for Texas here with us today. Hey, State Senator Nathan Johnson from Dallas. Senator, thank you for joining us today here behind the pine curtain, as we like to say, and appreciate your leadership and your work. Very glad to have the State Representative Marianne Perez, representative from Houston, represents around the Ship Channel area of Houston, as a matter of fact. Very knowledgeable about these issues. And then we have State Representative Drew Darby from San Angelo, Texas.
San Angelo.
And we tried to get him to be Drew Darby and Jay Dean today, but we wouldn't ask that of anybody. Jay Dean is our fourth panelist. He's from Longview, but we tease him about being a Cajun from time to time. And we're glad that we don't have to be Jay Dean today. We can be Representative Brian Slayton. Representative, thank you for being here from Greenville, I believe. Mm-hmm. Just finished up your first term.
Yes, sir.
So we're glad to have you on the campus of Stephen F. Austin State University.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause as we get started here today. I thought, how can we start our panel off a little differently than other panels? And so, has anybody ever watched Jeopardy on TV? Y'all watch that show? I never watch it, but when they were recruiting for the host, I had a hair appointment that day and I missed out, and so they chose Alec Trebek, and I've never gotten over that. But I thought we'd do a little modified Jeopardy, and we have these panelists, we have these contestants, and they all make the whopping sum of $600 a month. That's gross, not net, by the way. And so, usually on Jeopardy they say for $600, so it's going to be for $600, and you only get the same $600. You don't get anything extra. I'm sorry. And you get to pick a category, but can we collectively decide the category is going to be energy?
Yes.
Okay. I've got 3 or 4 Jeopardy questions. We'll see how good our panelists are and who's winning at the end, and if they're entitled to their $600 a month check when we get through today. Okay. Here's the first one. $15.8 billion was paid in state and local taxes and state royalties by this industry just last year alone.
What is Texas oil and gas?
All right, very good, very good. Jumped on out there. See, Representative Perez was trying to play by the rules, and he just
I was
blew
trying
it.
to make the noise, and he just jumped in.
Okay.
Okay, you can answer.
Representative, let's see if you get this next one here. Over 422,000 Texans had a direct paycheck from this industry just last year.
What are the independent school districts? No. Oh, what is oil and gas?
Oh, what is oil and gas? There you go. All right.
I just spin it, right?
600 is all you get. I'm sorry, no more.
That's okay.
All right, here we go. This is a compound category, so for 600, here we go. The Texas Rainy Day Fund, the permanent the permanent university fund, and the permanent school fund received billions of dollars from this industry exclusively. Senator,
Texas oil and gas industry.
what is Texas oil and gas? Correct.
What is?
I'm sorry. Rules.
We've got to train our panelists. We need more time to work on this. Come back in about 30 minutes.
Yes.
We're going to keep going. Last question. $1.84 billion was received directly from local mineral property taxes paid by oil and gas. And the answer is?
What is Texas oil and gas?
Oh, my goodness. We had it.
Ding, ding,
You
ding,
missed
ding.
training.
What is Texas
Texas.
school district?
What are Texas school districts? Let's give our panelists a round of applause here. You know, I think we all know that Texas would be in big jeopardy if it weren't for oil and gas, right? That's the main point here. Oil and gas is a mighty contributor to our state's economy. You know, a lot has changed in the last year, as Representative Clardy talked about. A year ago, people were wondering if oil and gas had a future. Today, people around the world are wondering if they have a future without oil and gas. You know, a decade ago, countries in Europe exchanged energy security for energy ideology, and today they're suffering mightily because of those choices. So I hope today we can talk about policies for Texas, what directions we can go, and let's mix it up and make it fun. And you will get a prize, I'm sure. You'll get a nice gift bag from the Nacogdoches Chamber when you leave today. All right, so let's do this. So if Texas were its own country, I want to set this up for you guys. If Texas were its own country, we would be the fourth largest oil-producing nation in the world. If Texas were its own country, we would be the third largest natural gas-producing nation in the world. If Texas were its own country, I really don't have another stat. I just like the way that sounds, Representative Hobson. What about you? But here's the question. I would like for you as panelists just to discuss how much oil and natural gas is produced in Texas, how much is consumed, what is used in Texas, where does the rest of it go, to demonstrate just how important these rankings are. So if somebody wants to, Representative Perez, won't you start us out here, because you're quick, you played by the rules, you hit the button. So you start us out there and your thoughts in that regard.
You know, you're absolutely correct. Texas is the largest energy producing and energy consuming state in the nation. The industrial sector, including refineries and petrochemical plants, accounts for half of the energy consumed in the state. A large part of the petrochemical industry lies within my district in Southeast Houston and House District 144. It's a dominant economic engine that benefits the city, the region, the state, and the nation, and continues to grow every single day. Houston is the energy capital of the world. It employs nearly a third of the nation's jobs in oil and gas. The sheer amount of companies and thought leaders in one geographical area yields opportunities for all the sectors of the energy industry, including growing focus on energy tech and renewable forms of energy. Texas ranks second in the nation for both population and the size of its economy, and it consumes a large share of the nation's energy. In 2018, Texas accounted for about 1/7 of the U.S. energy consumption, more than any other state. However, Texas was sixth in the nation in per capita energy consumption. Texas is also the nation's third largest net energy supplier despite its high energy use. The industrial sector in Texas includes the energy-intensive petroleum refining and chemical manufacturing industries. That sector is the state's largest energy consumer and accounts for about half of the end-use energy composition. Transportation is the second largest energy user and accounts for 1/4 of the state's end consumption, in part because of the large numbers of registered motor vehicles in Texas, and the great distances across the state and high number of vehicle miles traveled annually. So,
There will be a test at the end of this on that. This is an area, obviously, that you know a lot about because you live it. You live right in the middle of it. You see the refining. You see where product is produced from all over Texas and how it's used, refined, and then transported elsewhere. Let's open this question up to the other panelists to jump in as well. Thinking about those statistics that Representative Perez cited, thinking about the rankings of where Texas is today, fourth largest oil producer, third largest natural gas producer, and that we lead in production and consumption of energy. What does this mean for Texas as a leadership role that we have? What does this mean for schools like SFA? What are some thoughts that you think about knowing about these rankings?
Well, good afternoon. I'm Drew Darby. I'm from San Angelo, Texas, and it's always a pleasure to be back. I'm a repeat offender here in Nacogdoches. I've had to listen to Clardy many times in the past, and sitting near him on the floor of the Texas House, and we love him, but he's our Travis Clardy. And thank you for hosting us, Travis, again. Again, I'm from a region of Texas where we have a lot of oil and gas exploration. In order for it to be refined in Mary Ann's district, it's got to be produced in my district. And so we have a lot of the challenges. I've been practicing law for nearly 50 years, and a lot of that in the oil and gas sector. And I've seen peaks and valleys. You know, we probably would not have had any of these numbers, you know, as little as 20 years ago. The idea that we'd be sitting here and saying that the oil and gas industry is 35% of the Texas economy is startling from the standpoint of seeing all the booms and the busts. I lived through the Arab oil embargo in the 70s, you know, when we had a collapse of the oil and gas industry in early 1980s. We've always had feast or famine. We've always had the Texas economy that derived a large part of its economic base from the oil and gas industry rise and fall on the successes of the oil and gas industry. Clearly, the housing market collapsed when the oil and gas industry suffered. So even the idea that we're talking today about such a significant part of our Texas economy, that's not always been the case. But because of the technological advances of the oil and gas industry and the folks who, in their generosity, have shared those completion techniques with the whole world, Texas has enjoyed a rejuvenation, if you will, of the oil and gas industry. I remember projections in the early 2000s that we would be out of oil and gas in the not too distant future, but now we're experiencing an opportunity to continue that extraordinary growth in the oil and gas industry and watch the effects upon our schools, our roads, our property taxes, our employment. When you look at the industry as a whole, delivers about $451 billion worth of economic impact to the state of Texas. $451 billion. Clearly, it's an important part. And so our job as policymakers is to make sure we have a regulatory and legal framework available so that that industry can continue to deliver the energy needs of this great state. And so, you know, as we talk about some of the pressures being put on the industry from either Washington or Wall Street, saying you will do these things to be environmentally sensitive, and you will. We're going to rely upon this industry to reduce carbon emissions and be the leader globally when we know that nations like China and Russia and India continue to pollute our planet. And we look upon Texas taxpayers and businessmen to pay a large cost of changing how we do business here in Texas for that objective. I think we have to be very sensitive to the policies that we may implement and how it will affect this important industry. So I'm glad to be with you today. It's an important subject, but I will tell you, the Texas oil and gas industry, we need to continue to have policies that allow that industry to proliferate, to continue to expand. We don't need to be talking about the end of the oil and gas industry. We need to be talking about how we continue to make it grow for world and strategic security, not only abroad, but for here in the United States and certainly in Texas. We need to be talking about how we balance that with certainly environmentally sensitive measures. And so we as policymakers need to implement policies that will allow the continued growth of the industry, but yet be sensitive to the economic impacts of the industry and to balance that so that we can achieve some of these objectives, but yet not kill the industry that has allowed a lot of the infrastructure growth, has allowed the funding of our schools, allowed the funding of our roads. All of that is a direct outgrowth of the success of the oil and gas industry. It's our obligation to continue policies that will enhance that.
Keep going, please. No. Yes, sir, Senator.
Todd, if I could just add very briefly, Mary did an excellent job of laying out the importance of it, and Representative Darby Clardy, there's a lot of people, but
Don't get me confused.
good colleagues have emphasized the importance of it, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's important that we observe that no industry is static. So as we look to preserving the benefits that the oil and gas industry can provide to the state and to the nation, to our schools, to all jobs, all the things that it does and can continue to do in the future. Todd, I think it was you who talked about not an energy transition, but an energy addition. We all want to make sure that happens, but if we try to preserve what we have instead of adapt to the world, I think all of our efforts will be in vain. We can enact government policies that try to fight Wall Street or fight Washington. They may have a little bit of effect, but longer term, even near term, for this industry to flourish, I think we're going to have to call upon the capital that we have here in the state, the engineers and the scientists that we have here in this state, the people in this industry who really, I think, have a great ability to render the hydrocarbon industry consistent with a lot of the environmental objectives that we have. But if we're lazy, if we just try to hold on to what we've always had in the past, I think we're going to lose out. So as we develop these policies, I want to make sure that we harness the innovative power that we have in this state while producing a clean, reliable, dispatchable form of energy that can help out with all kinds of things. I just think it's important that we look forward, not backward, as we do it.
Representative Slayton.
Yes, I'm Brian Slayton. Happy to be here. Appreciate the invite. Appreciate Travis Clardy taking me under his wing every step of the way in my freshman session. Anyway, but no, this industry, what I think about first is how it helps the individual, how it helps the family. What's great about America, people can go from different economic classes. They can go from lower income, medium income, higher income, and that's what's happened in the oil and gas industry. And it's changed people's lives and how they can take care, provide for their family and in their community. So that's wonderful. Well, in the same way for the state of Texas, just the opportunity we have options. There's states that they don't have oil and gas under their feet, and they're having to figure out what can they do. Their only options of buy it, consume it. And in Texas, we have lots of options, and we just have a great opportunity to provide resources for everybody. I mean, and with that, it helps us fund our state budget. So, but like I say, the best thing about it is what it does for the individual family, giving them a job, and also the opportunity to make a lot of money if it works out for them.
Yeah, 422,000 Texans had a direct job in oil and gas last year, not counting the indirect jobs that totals, $1.5 million. So it's very, very impactful, and appreciate all of your thoughts on that. The Energy Information Administration, which is a division of the Department of Energy in D.C., projects that U.S. energy consumption will grow through 2050. So, not every study you always agree with, right? But we kind of get that. There's 6 or 7 billion people in the world today. By the year 2050, we expect there to be 9 to 10 billion people in the world. We're going to need more energy, not less. And so in thinking about that, EIA, this same entity, published another report, and they examined the effects if no interstate natural gas pipelines were built between 2024 and 2050. And in that conclusion of that report, they said natural gas demand would decrease, prices would increase, but its share of U.S. electricity production would fall to 34% by the year 2050. So, and that the generation mix would change. And so in thinking about that question, I'd like to hear the panelists' thoughts on how you think that generation, first of all, is infrastructure important? Secondly, how do you think the energy mix might change with or without new pipelines? So how big a role is infrastructure? And then what do you think that energy mix might look like with pipelines or without moving forward? What are some thoughts there? Anybody want to take a stab?
Sure,
Okay.
I'll take a stab. Obviously, infrastructure is very, very important. Once it's refined in House District 144, it then has to get to its end user. So whether it be by ship, whether it be by truck, a lot of it's by truck, some of it's by railroad. So infrastructure is so very important. How are we going to move this after it's refined? We get it from Representative Darby, I get it over here, and then how does it get to the consumer and everywhere else it needs to go? And the trucks, they really do. They mess up bridges, roads. I mean, pipeline is the safest. There's accidents with the big 18-wheelers. That's a whole nother issue. So pipeline really is the most effective, fast, safest way to get things across. So it's very, very important, especially in my area.
Yeah, it gets there about safely 99 point something percent of the time
Right.
when it's used by pipeline. And so obviously they are an important part. Thinking about our increased demand for energy, I kind of think natural gas should be a part of that. But what other energy sources might be out there that you think could grow? And I mean, because we're kind of an all the above energy state. We're kind of a let's not let that government pick winners and losers. Let's let the marketplace do that. So what are thoughts on, does natural gas have a role in the future? And then what are some of those energy sources? Senator?
It's a good time for the question, just since we're revising our energy markets right now. Absolutely, natural gas plays a pivotal role. It's going to continue to play a pivotal role in our energy mix. It's one of the great strengths we have in Texas. We're number one in gas, we're number one in wind, we're number one in solar, we've got nuclear, we've got battery technology, we've got crypto coming online that's going to kind of act as inverse batteries. Keeping that mix is vital. One advantage that natural gas has, at least for the near term, is that it's quick. It provides energy quickly when we need it, and it can be very, very clean if it's well done. And so that kind of gets back to, if we're going to hold on to this strength, the pressures that the oil and gas industry faces have to do with kind of legacy problems from the last century. We've done a great job at making things cleaner, but we have to keep going. If we do, there will be less opposition to continuing the role that natural gas plays in power generation, among other things. So I think part of the challenge here is not just to legislate certain mixes, but to communicate with the public and to actually perform well as an industry so that we gain the faith of the public, and it will continue to play a key role in our energy mix.
And infrastructure is very important, and something I hope we do for the future is going to involve some more of that. Just like the federal government, they have strategic reserves for gas. I believe the state of Texas we need to have our own strategic reserves for gas. And I believe we look at how much was used during the winter storm to get us back online. We can store that for just a fraction of our rainy day fund, and I believe that is a valid use of the rainy day fund for Texas to have our own strategic reserves, and we could have more opportunity. We could have more flexibility. So right now, with the gas prices surging, we could tap into those reserves to help lower the gas price for Texans. We'd be able to take action. So I think we produce more. I think we have strategic reserves, and we use those to help us in bad times with natural disasters or in the market to make it less of an impact on our individuals and on the businesses. I think that's something we should do going forward.
Todd, we have a perfect example of this state investing in infrastructure. I'm looking at Senator Nichols and Chuck Hobson here. Back during previous legislative sessions back in 2007, we were asked to vote on $8 billion worth of transmission lines out to West and North Texas. My question to David Swinford at the time was, we're going to spend $8 billion building lines to an area of the state where we have no power generation. What are you thinking? And literally, the discussion had to do with, if you build it, they will come. Truly, Texas invested that money, and we now enjoy generation that was unfathomable when we were talking about that original investment. We now are in a position where there's so much generative capacity in the region that we have implemented, the PUC has implemented what they call a GTC, which is a generic transmission constraint, which says we can't take all your power generated. All that cheap power being generated by wind and solar and other sources, we can't deliver that to the people where we need the load in a time of need because of that constraint. And so I think the state needs to continue to look at our transmission capability to make sure that as we bring alternative sources of power generation on board, that we have the ability to get it to the people who need that load. And certainly as it impacts the oil and gas industry, one of the complaints I hear from oil and gas operators is we don't have enough source power to run our pads and our drilling rigs. We need more transmission capability. And so that is an issue that we're going to continue to be faced moving forward. Do we have enough transmission capability to get these alternative sources of power, if you will, to the load areas as we need it, when we need it? So I'm proud of Texas. That $8 billion, which we invested back in 2008 and 9, is now turned into over $16 billion in return for ratepayers. So it's paid for itself in cheaper electricity rates. Industries have benefited. Sale of products have benefited from the cheaper energy source.
Well, you've all talked and touched on the theme of infrastructure. The panel right before lunch today talked about infrastructure quite extensively that Senator Nichols and his colleagues were on. You know, in thinking about this session, it's sponsored by Cheniere. We are so grateful for their investment in Texas. You think about infrastructure, these projects are measured in the billions, not millions. I mean, pretty sure it's like upwards of 15, 16, 17 for the first initial effort that Cheniere invested in the Lone Star State. There's conversations today about Cheniere adding on and putting billions of more dollars to work here in the Lone Star State. And that's exciting. It should be exciting for everyone because you don't have to live in the middle of the oil patch to benefit from oil and gas in Texas because it serves our schools, our roads, our rainy day funds. In thinking about LNG exports, I think about ice cream. Right? What's the great line on Bluebell? Eat all you can and sell the rest. It's like cattle. It's like any other agricultural product or natural resource. If your market is big, you're going to produce a lot of it. And what that means for us here in Texas, we pay some of the lowest energy costs of anywhere in the world. because we have access to markets, and so it creates investment, and we have people that are investing, and those dollars turn over. So we certainly appreciate Cheniere for a lot of reasons. Texas is home to Cheniere. We have Freeport LNG, and we have another LNG facility that'll be really good for East Texas. It's the Golden Pass in Beaumont. And with the Haynesville, all of you should be excited. I hope you own the mineral rights to your property. If you're like me, we have family photos in our hall at our home, you know, and you see your great-grandparents in the buggy on their wedding day and they're leaving the church. I look at that photo and I think, why didn't you reserve the mineral rights when you sold that land? I mean, I just can't help it. But if you think about LNG exports that are going to be working to meet that energy demand, I want the panelists to think for a moment, what role can Texas play? Does LNG, is that going to be a part of the energy mix by 2050? Do you think energy policy should encourage LNG exports as a part of a long-term global energy supply? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I believe we need to continue to encourage that type of investment. I think we have statutory provisions that encourages economic development. Chapter 313, for one, we did not renew. In the session coming, we're going to have to look at that and have an economic tool available. Out in rural Texas, that's really the only tool available for us to attract business and industry is under that type of incentive. So I think that's one of the challenges facing the legislative process in this next session is how do we continue to encourage economic development by statutory provisions which encourage the cooperation with local governments. So certainly building more LNG facilities. I think, again, using your Bluebell description, I do think that if we commit to building out that infrastructure, that I think producers seeing that market will continue to explore and develop other natural gas horizons. This state is blessed with the bountiful resources below it. And I believe industry and technology will keep pace with the demand. So I'm encouraged and would continue to look for opportunities to support that.
And it's a good thing the Biden administration in March issued some orders to try to clear away some of the red tape to increase our LNG exports. No irony there. But as the conservative on the panel, I got to say that I do favor some of the infrastructure investments that were discussed on the transportation panel. I think make tremendous sense. They permit commerce in all sorts of areas, but in particular LNG exports. So there's a number of things we can do, but I would tread lightly on too much state involvement in what actually is a market. I have a lot of faith in this industry to be able to respond to global conditions and state conditions. And when legislators make decisions and start building this and that, and making too many rules and incentives here and there, it can have distortive effects and sometimes leads to great things, and we try to plan and do things right. But I would be a little careful before making too many rules to try to favor one particular outcome in a dynamic industry like energy.
And I think that approach is actually wise because we know we've grown into the position that we are today for basically three reasons in Texas. We have population that makes us a leader. We have resources that makes us a leader. But we also have policies that have enabled this type of investment like a Cheniere to come in and put $18 billion in to build a facility. That's a lot of money. And I met with a company yesterday, they've got $10 billion they want to invest in Texas. And they're looking for what the best opportunity is available to them to do it. When you think about liquefied natural gas is one of the big reasons. Let's kind of shift it. We've got time for a couple more quick topics here. Natural gas is one of the big reasons that our air quality emissions have improved dramatically over the last 3 decades. I mean, carbon dioxide emissions have declined for the last 30 years in Texas. Methane emissions have declined for the last couple of decades in Texas. The 6 pollutants that are mostly watched by the EPA have all declined by 73% because of a strategic effort to improve our world and to improve our climate. That continues. And so I'm excited about that. When I started at Texoga, the big word was the big word was fracking.
That was great.
Now people are saying, can we frack in the UK again? Because they realize they might have messed up there. But now the big word is flaring. And it's interesting to me that the rate of routine flaring has declined to less than 0.2% as of like November of 2021, according to the Texas Railroad Commission. So I'd like to discuss, should policymakers be looking at benchmarks like this? Is that a reasonable expectation? And what are some other benchmarks that you might like to see as we meet our energy needs, but also we want to meet society's goals to make climate progress?
Can I jump in on that one? According to what I've got here, 5% of Permian Basin operators are responsible for half of well site emissions. And I'm not blaming the 5%, some of them are big, but a lot of producers are small. And we do need to control our emissions, and flaring sometimes goes away as a problem, sometimes it's a bigger problem. But I heard my colleague here talking about state investments in reserves. We're talking about investments in infrastructure. One thing we might consider to do as a state is to help small producers afford some of the things that we might need to implement, like sensors and monitors on equipment that would help the TCEQ monitor things. You know, sometimes people have a problem and we don't want to hit them with a fine, we want to help them fix it. So I think maybe the state could support some of these small producers to the extent they're responsible for flaring and other emissions problems with incentive programs to purchase environmental equipment.
Flaring is a result of safety. When you have production, and flared gas is a byproduct of oil production. So when you don't have infrastructure built out, if you don't have a gathering system in place to take that gas, then in order to produce the oil, it has to be flared. And so you're going to have flaring. It's a necessary part of the process. But the object of the state and producers should be, and royalty owners, should be to develop the infrastructure necessary for the takeaway of that gas so that landowners and the state are paid their severance taxes, because you don't have to burn that molecule of gas. You can put it in a pipeline and transport it and sell it. And landowners, royalty owners, the state, severance tax, all of that would benefit from having that infrastructure in place. So there's going to be some flared gas issues. The idea is to minimize that by planning and developing infrastructure that will have that takeaway.
And I agree with Representative Darby on this. But speaking of flaring, we do have many producers that are, once you've got the flame going, it does a pretty good job of getting rid of this excess methane before it gets into the environment. The problem is candles blow out. And some of the larger producers have an economic volume where it justifies installing shields to protect the flame. But some of that stuff's really expensive, and it's just in addition to infrastructure, it's another place where we might be able to assist the smaller producers who are trying to operate consistently with environmental standards. But it's difficult and it's expensive. So this and infrastructure may be a place where the state can help the industry and the environment.
The industry is really focused on all these topics. In fact, they invest more in a lower emissions, lower carbon profile than any other industry in the world. And they are committed to a cleaner, stronger, better energy future. And the last topic is, we're getting short on time here today. You mentioned, Senator, earlier about an energy transition. I think you all have heard energy transition probably a time or two in the evening news cycle. I'd like us to talk a minute about each one of you as we wrap up. How do you define an energy transition? And just kind of define what that might look like to you and how that might be rolled out. And Representative Daugherty, we'll start with you, and we'll work down the line there.
Well, I'm just going to try to give you some bullet points. An energy transmission to me means that we are continuing to diversify our energy options. We're looking at geothermal. Clearly, the state has some geothermal possibilities, not only in the Big Bend region, but along the Gulf Coast. But we're going to have to settle out as a legislature the legality of who owns the right to put those downhole heating elements 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 feet below the surface. How do you arrange the liability, the leasing rights to that horizon? All of those issues need to be established by industry and, of course, the legislature to make sure we have that in progress. In process. Another thing is carbon capture. If we're going to get to carbon neutrality, then we're going to have to figure out a way to capture that carbon, to process it, to store it, and that requires legislation that aligns the liability issues of that horizon where you're storing that carbon. Pore space ownership, who owns the space within that horizon, liability issues, all of that needs to be ferreted out by the legislature to allow that type of technology to move forward. And to me, that's the type of, we addressed ownership of produced water this past legislative session, which established if you produced as an oil and gas waste that water and then treat it to a level that you can reintroduce it back into the hydrological system, who owns that water? Clearly, the oil and gas operator has an obligation to properly dispose of it, but if he goes the extra steps and treats it to a level you can reuse it, then who would show up and with their hand out and claim part of that water now that it has value? And so we established the kind of the precedent that if these oil and gas operators take that produced water and combine it and treat it to a level, then absent a surface use agreement, then that operator would be entitled to the proceeds, beneficial proceeds from that oil and gas waste. So, but I think all of that is within the purview of the legislature to try to make sure that we have a framework that will encourage those alternative energy sources.
Sounds like an energy transition is going to keep the legislature with something to do, just in case you didn't have enough. You mentioned capturing carbon. That's something that tree farmers in East Texas are really excited about, because you've got a pretty good carbon capture system with pine trees and standing forest and the work that they do. And so I think there's certainly partnerships that are being looked at. Representative Perez?
I don't want to go behind Chairman Darby. he's the hardest act to follow up here. No, just kidding. Energy transition. I think that I don't see oil and gas going anywhere anytime soon, or our fossil fuels. I know this is not in the direction that most want us to go in, but I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. We are looking at renewables. We're looking at solar. We're looking at carbon, we're looking at everything. We're nuclear, all different types of energy. And I think that we should still continue to do what we do best and what is best for this state at this point, while working at the same time to try to take maybe the profits that you're getting right now, right here today, where barrels, $100 a barrel, where prices $100 a barrel, and take some of that and move those funds over to working on the renewables and where we need to be by 2050 or 2080. But I don't ever see oil and gas just going away 100%.
When oil and gas is used as the basic building block for 96% of the products that we use every day, from makeups to medicines to tires to sports equipment, it's hard to, your point, and I think that's what we're seeing companies do, making commitments of billions of dollars to capture carbon and to have a lower emissions profile. Fuels that we use today are 99% cleaner than they were 30 years ago. And so certainly innovation and technology plays into that.
Let me just add here.
Yes.
In the 70s, I represent Pasadena, Texas. And it was so bad back then. And what a long way we've come, because we used to literally say, "You live in Stinkadena?" I mean, we literally called it Stinkadena. And over the years, we are now, Pasadena, get down Dena. So what an improvement from the 1970s, right? So yes.
That's great. That is a great example of how technology has improved the quality of life. Senator Johnson?
I think we are seeing a more of an energy addition than a transition in many ways. We're transitioning into a more complex, stable, cheaper, cleaner mix of energy, but global consumption is going to continue to increase. China's still burning coal. India's still burning coal. Coal's just about dead in Texas, happily. We're not burning fuel oil in our homes. Our cars are transitioning from gasoline to electricity, but a lot of the electricity is going to be powered by natural gas. So we're going from refined gasoline to natural gas cars in some sort of way. So I think we're going to see the industry, at a minimum, do as well as it has done in terms of production in the past. And in the more recent past, it's been rising rapidly. Globally, I think if Texas can figure out how to produce hydrocarbon energy cleanly, so much better for the planet. I mean, we can shut down our emissions completely in Texas and the earth is still going to heat up and the ice caps are going to melt unless we can export the technologies and the fuels that are going to be accessible to these other countries and places around the world. So I think the transition is happening, but it's not so much completely replacing one form of energy with another, but improving the way we do things and exporting the technology as well as the raw materials that we're able to produce here.
Thank you. Representative Slayton?
Well, I think our transition here in Texas needs to be leaning more heavy on oil and gas, and then for power, go to nuclear, geothermal, and I think we should get less and less more dependent or planning for green energy because it's so unreliable. Our biggest problem in Texas, if we make that plan legislatively, what we have is what's happening with investments. I'll explain. So a private equity firm, they'll reach out to people, get them to invest, and then normally it was just ROI that they would try to guarantee the investor. But what they're doing now is they're getting people to invest, and they're telling them, hey, you invest, we're going to work with businesses that use green energy for the electricity. We're going to work with people that, all these other things that are not ROI and pushing an agenda. And you have the SEC that enforces that. I mean, they're the only people that really enforce laws is the SEC. And my brother's CFO of a private equity firm. They've been talking about doing this for years, and they're doing it now. And so that's where we see. I mean, I'm a rural member of the legislature, and we see all these little small rural counties popping up with all the solar farms. The reason that's happening is because some businesses can't move here and move into an area unless they can tap into green energy. And so we have an agenda being pushed with the SEC that is enforcing an investment from a private individual to a private company. And I think Texas, we should do what's best for Texas, and we should utilize our oil and gas. Of course, states that they have a lot of green energy, they want us to stop pumping oil and gas, and they want us to depend on green energy, because when we buy supplies from them, turbines from them, we're helping them. But I think Texas, we need to do what's best for us, and I think we need to use what we have and be less and less dependent on green energy. That's just my opinion.
And I respect Representative Slayton's and share to some extent his attitude towards utilizing the resources that we have here. I mean, we've all been quite in favor of the industry. Let's make it clear, the SEC is not enforcing ESG or green policies. The ESG is making sure that you're not lying to your investors. If you tell your investors, I only use green energy, and then you go out and don't use green energy, you get busted by the SEC. He's correct, there is a movement. It's a private sector movement towards dealing only people with green energy, and that's a problem for the industry. It's an image problem. I don't think it's a government problem, and I think Texas runs the risk of making a mistake, and we may have made a mistake in the last session with Senate Bill 13 with our anti-ESG, anti-boycott stuff. I know there's reasons for these things, and capital markets are real, but long term, I don't think we can state legislate our way into, pushing back a global movement towards this. We've got to show people that we can do this well. And it's not the SEC, it's just private industry. But natural gas is pretty darn clean. When you burn CH4, you produce H2O. So I think we can do this right.
Yeah, I think I think what we have lacked in our country in the last few years is the opportunity for a rational conversation about how we move forward and we meet our energy needs. And I think there has been certainly a drive by some to eliminate fossil fuels. There's been a drive by some to eliminate renewable energies. We kind of think consumers ought to be king. And we think that industry has a responsibility. And as we've discussed, our air quality is cleaner today. Anytime an oil well is drilled, there are multiple layers of steel and cement that are used to protect our water supply, which is extremely important to East Texans and all Texans. And I think we have an opportunity to work to grow our economy, grow our jobs, and protect our environment. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think you see that oil and gas, the industry, is leading the way. It is difficult when pipelines are canceled and when permits are delayed. And it does send the wrong signals when we talk about not investing just because of the type of energy source it is. And I think what we've seen in Texas, we're leaders, guys. We lead the world in energy production. We are the world's capital for energy production, and it's because of this can-do attitude and putting it all together and making certain it works right. And I think that's the commitment that this industry has, and they want to partner with legislators to find those right solutions so that we can grow those investments and grow those opportunities. That's for sure. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. They've done a fantastic job today.